hashtag Creative Brexit. And of course, we are going to be chewing over the question, the title for this evening, Brexit and the creative industries. How bad can it be? A gentle nod, perhaps, to where the organisers think your sympathies lie. So let's find out in our very unscientific straw poll if you could just raise your hands if you voted Remain in the referendum. Raise your hands now. OK, not everybody. Who voted Leave? Fewer, but anyway, OK, there is a win for Remain. Kel's surprise.
Has anybody make clear that Manick brought 10 friends with him?
And only 3 have turned up.
What does that say about your campaign?
They all put their hands up.
They're suffering.
And just to actually say, Manick Govinda is from Artists for Brexit. The clue is in the title there, clearly. Has anybody changed their minds since the referendum and would vote differently if we were to hold that referendum again this evening?
Is Jeremy Hunt in the audience?
And not unless you brought him along as your friend, did you? Now, we are going to kick off with questions from me, first of all, just to get things going. And I'm going to ask each of the panellists to sort of set out their stall in a minute, and that is a minute, 60 seconds. I won't time it to the second, but I will keep an idea on the clock. And then in about half an hour's time, as I say, I will ask for questions from the audience. Manick, why don't you go first and set out what you think the impact is going to be of Brexit on the creative industries?
OK. Well, I think what the exiting the European Union is going to what impact it's going to have is actually that it's going to allow Britain and to be much more outward-looking, much more global-facing, rather than just working within the European Union, which is, I think, culturally and economically constricting. I also think it's going to allow British artists to start looking much more at their own nation and really starting to look at the inspirations that this vote has given them. So someone like Grayson Perry, said that it was a 2 fingers vote from the millions fed up with being ignored by the establishment. And I think we'd like to see more of that kind of response from artists that will be inspired by this historic moment in British history and British political history. Economically, I think we shouldn't worry. I think we should be optimistic and hopeful, because if we look at statistics, the kind of cultural export of goods and services from the UK was about 5.2 billion pounds of arts and culture goods and services, and the large share of that went to beyond the EU, so outside to non-EU countries, and that was 84% of the total exports. So the remaining 60%, which actually the Arts Council were incredibly surprised by this research, relates to exports to the EU. We will survive, and we will be a globe-trotting country.
When did you start up the campaign group, Artists for Brexit?
Well, I'm a co-founder, and Michael, who's another artist here, was his inspiration, really. We both had it in the back of our minds. It was in February in the Wetherspoons pub, so about a month ago, actually.
OK. Well, congratulations on your newly found group. Ed Vaizey, the impact of Brexit on the creative industries. How bad can it be?
Well, I was going to take the mickey out of Manick for saying that we should leave the European Union in order to give artists inspiration, but actually he's sort of slightly inspired me, because obviously as the arts minister for 6 years I had to deal with a resolutely left-wing culture of people who just all voted Labour and just about tolerated me. So if it brings more right-wing artists, right-wing Tory voting artists like Manick out of the woodwork, then that's got to be a good thing.
Sure, don't hold your breath, is all I can say. But anyway,
something that celebrates Britishness and Toryism, Britishness and Toryism, which are inextricably linked, obviously, has to be celebrated. So I can see a silver lining to Brexit, and I also do agree, and it'll come out, I'm sure, in the questions, that Manick has a point that there is certain. We export a lot to the US without being part of, NAFTA, as it were. So the creative industries do have a form, if you like, of exporting around the world, perhaps more than many other industries. But I remain, as it were, a Remainer and a Ramona, partly because I find ourselves in an unusual position, which the Leavers didn't tell us about. One is that we're trying to mitigate the impact of Brexit. I really do not sign up to the bollocks that Manick talks about, that we're going to be a sort of global free trading nation. We might be in 50 years' time. It's not going to happen overnight. The idea that a free trade deal with Vietnam, where I'm indeed the trade envoy and we'd love a free trade deal with Vietnam, is going to replace frictionless trade with Germany and France is absolutely for the birds. So the thing that really annoys me most about the Leavers is the ridiculous lies they tell about this global opportunity and all the money we're going to put into the NHS. And the second, so mitigating the effects of Brexit is where we are. And the second problem, of course, is what we face in terms of the fact that we face potentially the worst of all possible worlds of being outside the EU, but still having to abide by some of their rules and regulations. So,
all right.
On balance, I would prefer to remain.
On balance?
Well, I would have preferred to remain.
Okay, and we'll delve a little deeper into the effect of the creative industries. And yes, do participate, although keep your questions
Yes,
for a
heckle
little
as
bit.
much as you
no,
like.
heckle away.
I can tell. I can tell. What do you mean as a leaver you're outnumbered? As a leaver?
Yeah, well,
It is, but the Leave voice is strong and proud, isn't it? I can tell.
let me move on to Liam Byrne. Now, Liam Byrne, also a Remainer, but there must be some clear red Jeremy Corbyn light between you and your colleague here, Ed Vaizey.
I'm struggling to see it tonight. No, I mean, I agree with Ed that I think that this is going to be potentially pretty bad for the creative industries. And I suppose...
How bad?
I think it could be pretty bad, actually. I mean, the way I sort of look at it is that the creative industries flourish with the right mix of people, ideas, and money. And let's just take each of those in turn. So we have a brilliant creative industry sector in the UK because actually we have an incredibly diverse group of people who make up that community. And if we get the wrong answers on immigration policy, then that is going to be seriously, seriously damaged. And literally nothing I've heard from the government since the referendum gives me a shred of confidence that we're going to be a kind of open, welcoming nation when it comes to creative talent in the future. Second, if you think about ideas, like right now, my life is kind of dominated by two things. One, Cambridge Analytica, and second, the data protection bill, which is weaving its way through the Commons. Now, if we don't get like the right adequacy agreement on data sharing between Britain and Europe, we will basically have big barriers put in place to sharing data, and that means sharing ideas.
Okay.
That could damage creative kind of fluidity and intercourse, I think, over the years to come. And third, I'm afraid there is the humble question of money. I think the hit to our economy is going to be significant. But, coming from Birmingham, where there is like a real fusion between creative brilliance and engineering brilliance, I worry about the damage that will be done to sectors like the automotive sector, which in my part of the world are, the great kind of drivers of a lot of the digital and creative economies that we have. And that's not a new thing. That's been true since Matthew Bolton created Soho House in 1764.
All right. Well, since we are here at another lovely private members club, Ed Vaizey, picking up on one of your points, why should we be so worried about coming out of the EU in terms of the creative industries? You just said yourself, actually, aren't we the centre of creative industries when it comes to film, TV, pop? It's here in Britain.
No, that is true, and I think we should be confident on that level. We're much better at this stuff than the French and the Germans, no question about that. But I think if you get into the detail, there are certain slightly dull but important opportunities that we will potentially lose when we leave the European Union. One, for example, is broadcasting regulation, where if you are a member of the European Union, you can broadcast to all 28 member states. So we, as a result, have something like 500 foreign broadcasters, including, unfortunately, Russia Today, but many other more reputable broadcasters based in the UK, because they know that once they comply with Ofcom regulation, they comply effectively with all European regulation, that's a really important issue that the government has to try and navigate a way through. It's parallel to the financial services. And just quickly, because I know you're trying to shut me up because I'm rambling.
No.
But I just want to agree with Liam on the skills point. The access to talent is really, really important. There are a lot of ad agencies, for example, this is sort of under the radar point, which are entirely based in London, doing campaigns in Spain with a Spanish team based in London because of freedom of movement. So that is the whole freedom of movement issue is a big deal for the creative industry to rely on that much more than many others.
Well, Manick, what do you say to that? Because obviously that's an issue that both our other panellists have brought up. In terms of the numbers of people who are employed in the creative industries here who come from the EU, isn't that going to have quite a significant hit on the industry if it becomes more difficult for those people to come and work and live here?
Well, hopefully that kind of collaboration, that collaborative spirit will not die, and I certainly want to emphatically say that that's not what I see Britain becoming, of some kind of protectionist nation that's not going to collaborate with our kind of fellows across the continent and beyond. So if you look at the film industry, of course there's all of the big films, the James Bonds, the Harry Potters, The Darkest Hour, involves collaboration across the globe without a doubt. But the talent that is coming through the UK and how it works in co-productions and co-investments is a global relationship. So the government will be absolutely foolish to kind of sort of put the barricades up or fortress. I don't think it will do that. There will be in the kind of skilled sector of film and digital, the digital industries, post-production companies and so forth. Collaboration will happen. Where we find a shortage, actually, and I might be a bit rusty on figures, but a skills shortage in the UK is actually in visual effects. And they cannot recruit the visual effects specialists from the EU member states. So they're having to look beyond to Bangalore and Silicon Valley.
Right, and let's have a look at the figures, because how many people are we really talking about here, Liam? According to the Department of Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, the creative industries employed 1.9 million people in 2015. 115,000, sorry for the statistics, were from EU countries, other EU countries, and 103,000 were from outside of the EU. Now, that is a relatively even split anyway, but also in percentage terms, that is small beer compared to the sort of employment statistics of other industries.
That's true until you look at the reality that the government's target, I think, is still to reduce net migration to the tens of thousands. So I think it's going to be quite difficult for the Prime Minister to kind of strike an immigration deal with the rest of the EU that kind of leaves that target somehow behind. And so these things are kind of connected, and the reason that Ed is right about the possibility of these free trade deals abroad is that all of these foreign countries are going to insist on a migration deal. So there is no way on earth that India is going to strike a free trade deal with Britain unless there's a big migration part of it.
Right.
There's no way China's going to do the same thing without a big migration part. And if your net migration target is to reduce net migration to the tens of thousands, then you just kind of automatically predisposed to, I'm afraid, fortify the fortress.
Right, that is a sort of principle at the heart of this debate. The government says it's not going to close the doors. It does want to bring down net migration to tens of thousands. That's still the target that they've never been able to reach and continue not to reach. Are you reassured by your own government that there will still be an open door policy that will welcome people from the EU and outside in the numbers that are needed to fill the creative industries?
Well, it's still, in my view, a moving feast. We'll have to see. The Brexiteers, who I've always said are the ones who bring down the government rather than the so-called, mutineers.
Well, you would say that, of course.
Characterise people as have already kicked off about
fish.
Some of the fish in particular.
Yeah.
They're very upset about fish, migrating fish.
There's been a lot of fish throwing today.
But, exactly, and I think technically a breach of European regulations.
No.
Throwing dead fish into the Thames.
That's illegal.
Is a breach of European
and
regulations.
EU regulation. Yeah.
But
they probably did that on purpose.
Right.
And disrespectful to the fishermen. I agree. I do take them very seriously, but what I don't take seriously are political opportunists who lie to the British people and then set up publicity stunts like they did today. So, indeed, exactly.
I think Nigel Farage was a member of the EU
Manick,
Fisheries
all
Committee
these
and went to one out of 43 meetings.
Sort of
I've not revised.
They should come out up here on the stage with us.
No, let's not invite people up onto the stage.
They feel free to. They seem very free to contribute to our discussion.
I would say
but
that
Manick will be here to answer. You can jump in at any time, Manick, to defend.
I'm going to jump in. But yeah,
do
if
you
we
think,
can, there's going to be questions afterwards.
Well, let's just pick up on that. Do you think there is disrespect in this argument broadly? I mean, do you think people do feel still that? Obviously, this is a binary issue. This is the Leave Remain issue. Do you think there is a lack of respect towards people who voted Leave from Remainers like Liam and Ed Vaizey? Not specifically them, but in terms of treating people as if they are stupid.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Of course,
guys,
you do.
If you can, there will be questions afterwards, so please restrain. I absolutely. I think only yesterday we heard.
You don't think
Paris,
it's disrespectful
talking
to call
about
us Ramonas, for example?
Well, let him answer.
I'm not going to get into what this kind of.
I thought that's just what you were getting into.
Absolutely not. No. But there has. I don't want to retread the kind of past conflicts that the referendum results threw up. What I want to say is actually we also must not lose sight that it was about democracy, and so the economy is absolutely, of course it's important, but first and foremost, it is a sense of bringing back a sense of democracy to this country, where I think the majority of citizens felt absolutely alienated by the establishment, and I think that's a really important point to make. So culturally. What does that say? I think it says that there's a huge disconnect between the cultural sector, the artists who predominantly supported the Remain campaign, the Stronger In campaign, for example, and the disconnect, the polarisation between the people, the public, and
so why are there so few leavers in the creative industries?
It's interesting. I think. Obviously, there's the kind of financial relationships that EU funding has brought to the cultural sector. If you're, they say it's about £40 million a year of European money, which we obviously give 350 million.
And do you get any money from?
And I take money from whatever source. I don't have a problem. I don't see it as some sort of unethical thing to not take European funding.
But why instinctively are there fewer leavers? So
well. I think what we are seeing, what we're seeing is a kind of rather homogenous kind of cultural makeup, character, and actually, look, artists I think tend to going to Athens, not Athens. Well, actually, Athens is a bit sexy again, but they weren't before. The going abroad is an attractive thing, but actually, what's exciting is actually international artists that come to the UK, and we should look beyond cosmopolitan London to really start looking at places like Middlesbrough, and so forth.
I thought
there are of course other centres outside of London in terms of the creative industries. But one question for you, Ed Vaizey, is: could the creative industries, bearing in mind that it is so much a centre in the UK of creative industries, of art, film, pop, whatever, could they not help the UK in terms of emerging from Brexit and into Brexit? Could they not be the answer?
Well, I'm sure they could. I mean, I think, I think in terms of the strength of the Remainers' argument, the fact that the Leavers are heckling everything I say instead of listening to the nuances, shows just sort of what pathetic sort of grounds they're on in terms of the strength of their argument.
How's the respect thing going?
For example, with in terms of Manick, I respect the fact that I don't heckle people. So in terms of what Manick says, I totally understand from a Brexit point of view. as a Eurosceptic. First speech I gave in Parliament was a Eurosceptic speech. The sovereignty point. I totally understand. If you just take a view that we're on an inexorable path to United States of Europe, we have to get out of Europe. And I certainly wouldn't have signed up, indeed, for a single currency. And Manick and I probably would have found ourselves on the same side.
Right,
What I don't subscribe to are the ridiculous arguments about the fact we're going to be a global Britain signing free trade deals around the world. Because the free trade deals we sign are going to be just as controversial as anything with the European Union.
All right.
There was a huge, you won't remember, but you may not remember, but with the European Union deal with the US, there was a huge groundswell of opposition in this country about the potential privatisation.
Sure, but let's stick to the creative
NHS.
industries, Ed Vaizey, because that's what we're talking about. I take your point, as does the audience, in terms of your lack of faith in free trade agreements that can be done to replace, if there is, any loss of trade with Europe. But in terms of the creative industries, I mean, literally, how bad can it be for the creative industries?
Well,
People will have ideas wherever they come from.
No, I agree.
There will still be the passion that is necessary. So
There
how
is
bad?
a lot
Liam
of,
says pretty bad.
No, I mean there is light at the end of the tunnel. I mean the point I was trying to make earlier was that I think the creative industries are pro-European because they're used to working in an international way. And if you visit most creative industries firms, whether it's a film set or an ad agency or whatever, you will see people from lots of nationalities. Some of them European and some of them from outside the EU. The point is that we are, in my view, unnecessarily putting barriers between us and recruiting Europeans. But having said that, yes, a third of our creative industries trade is with the US.
Yep.
That happens without a free trade deal and will continue to happen.
And
things like the tax credits that Canada used to build its games industry will still be available
so not that bad
to us.
then?
It's not that bad.
Right. I mean,
exactly.
Liam Byrne, if we look
That
at
was
the
the
money...
point I was making
if
at
we-
the very
if we-
beginning,
it was,
despite all the absurd
Yeah.
heckling, that it may not be that bad.
He doesn't take it personally,
I
of
hate
course.
heckling.
No, he never has.
Liam, in terms of the money, we've just talked briefly about subsidy, and actually, Manick was right, it's about £40 million a year in terms of subsidy that come through EU grants. But what about a cheaper pound? What about inward investment? The figures are saying that the British film sector, in terms of inward investment, has jumped 39% to £1.6 billion over the first 9 months of 2017, and that's the highest on record. Isn't that something to cheer about?
Yeah, that's something to cheer about. But look, firms invest in people, and the creative process is not an exercise in solipsism. It's a creative, collaborative, cooperative process, and when you kind of put barriers in the way of assembling that kind of dynamic, creativity diminishes.
Or do you unleash it elsewhere?
No. I think it definitely gets harder because you're just not able to assemble with the same kind of speed and fluidity and richness and diversity, the kind of talent pool that we have in the UK today. And look, London is a kind of a global capital. London will always kind of do well. But think about the challenge that we've got in Birmingham. Think about the challenge that there is in Middlesbrough or Newcastle. Actually, we rely on a couple of things. We rely on a pretty tolerant immigration regime. We rely on free movement from Europe. We rely on good levels of investment, and we rely on a lot of public subsidy to ensure that the creative economies flourish outside London and animate those economies up and down the land.
All right, let me pose a different sort of scenario to you, actually, Manick, because there was an idea mooted and sort of rejected and denied by the Conservative Party when Philip Hammond said, look, in order to make Brexit work, we might have to create a different kind of economy here, maybe a low tax, low regulation economy. Do you think that would be a good idea? Do you think that would work for Britain?
I think none of us like paying high taxes. Looking at tax breaks for the creative sector is a very good thing. I think in terms of, not only in terms of fundraising, the American style model of patronage is really worth looking at, where there are some great tax breaks there. With certain industries, the gallery sector, the theatre sector, as well as film and television. So if we could look at how we reduce the kind of tariffs and the tax obstacles, would be a really exciting thing to do. So then we can start looking at going to China and vice versa to make some amazing work. actually.
Would you be worried by that idea of a low tax, low regulation?
Not at all, no. I mean, I think, the film industry in the UK has grown by 80% in the last 6 years compared to 8% in Europe. That's been driven by the tax credit, the video games tax credit and other tax credits have made a huge difference and will continue, I'm sure, after we leave the European Union. As I say, Canada is able to have tax credits which have boosted its games industry. One of the reasons, by the way, that the film industry has grown so much in the last 9 months is because the pound has crashed against the dollar, which is an added incentive to Hollywood studios to invest here. So in terms of that, Brexit's been very good for inward investment from the creative industries from the US. But there's no doubt that we do have these strong cultural ties with the US. I was thinking when you mentioned theatre, you talk to your average theatre producer, the first thing they will say if they have a successful hit is, maybe we could take it to Broadway. They don't say maybe we could take it to Paris or maybe we could take it to Berlin.
I think my issue with this is it still remains a kind of it's just too elitist. Look, my challenge in Birmingham is how do I get kids from Alum Rock to Stratford? Okay, so how do I encourage? I serve the most income-deprived constituency in Britain, in Hodge Hill.
But why would that change by leaving the EU?
Because if we cannot encourage, if we can't foster a more inclusive economy in the years to come, we won't be able to lift wages, and actually that is incredibly harder to unlock democratic power to grow the arts. I don't think we can rely much longer on elite-driven art investment. Actually, what we need is bottom-up investment in the arts, and that actually means supporting families, raising wages, and actually creating a much more democratic engagement in the arts. You can't do that if you destroy the fiscal base and embark on some race to the bottom in regulation, because actually what you'll end up is with a low-pay, low-skill economy, which is the direction we're heading in today.
All right, let's see if you're really in touch, though, urban creatives, as you all are, with modern Britain. Because Manick said, actually, you guys were probably more out of touch with the way people voted when they decided to cast their vote for Leave, particularly in the referendum. And there's this bit of research that is, well, it's interesting, telling, a bit of fun. And it's from YouGov, and it's the top 10 brands of Leave voters. HP Source, Bisto, ITV News, The Health Lottery, Birdseye, Iceland, Sky News, Cathedral City, PG Tips and Richmond Sausages. Whereas the top 10 brands for Remain voters were bbc.co.uk, BBC iPlayer, Instagram, London Underground, Spotify, Airbnb, LinkedIn, Virgin Trains, Twitter and EasyJet. Now, can you rest assured, you three, that you fitted into those categories in terms of the top 10 brands, or are you out of touch?
That is an amusing bit of fun.
It is an amusing bit of fun, yeah.
If you look at where the Leave vote came from, so there were two characteristics of the Leave vote. So one is the highest level of qualifications was GCSE, and second, predominantly they were aged over the age of 65. So if you just look at the raw data, the raw numbers, that is where the Leave vote tended to come from.
What do you say to that, Manick?
Well, I think, maybe
that is just true.
I recently did a survey that Chatham House did about what tribe I'm in, and it sounds like I'm sort of a self-hating European or something. I came out as a hesitant European, remaining to be convinced. But what I think is that getting back to democracy, what we're losing are the working class voices. And I think that the culture that the EU has generated has not.
So this is
it's
an important point. The only point I'd make is
writers and artists from working class backgrounds.
If you look at the general election after the referendum, a quarter of people who voted to leave stayed at home and didn't vote. So the idea that there is a democratic renaissance now that we've decided to leave the EU is at best not yet proven.
Right. Think of your questions, because I'm coming over to you in a few moments, but I'm just going to ask Ed Vaizey how important he thinks the London Mayor is in terms of protecting creative industries in London.
I think he's. Should I say I like Sadiq Khan? Am I allowed to say that? Because
well, you've said it now.
I'm still thinking about running against him, but no, he's a great guy. I like Sadiq. We've known each other. We came into Parliament together. I think as a voice, Sadiq is important. The London Mayor is important. So much about this is about kind of psychology and tone. That simply, talking up London and being open. I mean, we talked earlier about this whole thing about immigration and so on. Part of the whole issue about immigration is making people feel welcome. There are a lot of Europeans who are leaving, and this is what comes out of surveys of creative industry companies. They're not leaving because their immigration status has changed. They're leaving because they feel they've been sent a signal by the referendum that they're not welcome.
Right.
So the more that Sadiq can say London is open, as he does frequently, and that you are welcome and we want you and we value your contribution, as he does of all people who come to London, because London is still the world's premier global city.
What about you voicing that as London Mayor?
I will happily do that. I mean, I'll obviously thump Sadiq in any election if I choose to stand. And
are you going to
when
stand?
When I win, I will continue Sadiq's work.
What? Well, are you going to stand?
Well, I'm far too lazy to campaign.
That's not an answer.
I'm so lazy.
You say you're thinking of running.
Or a qualification.
Are you actually going to run?
There's a reason my surname is Vaizey.
So is that I am going to run, but
no, I probably won't.
You probably won't.
I don't know. We'll do a show of hands. Should I run?
Yes. Should Ed Vaizey run for mayor? Yes. Well, that was it. Who thinks he shouldn't run?
Yeah, give it a go.
I knew he would. I
No,
knew those.
more people.
I knew those two.
Well, more people said you're going to run. I mean, is that enough to? So when are you going to make your?
Well, I don't know.
Fun
We've got what's it called? A PAC, a sort of political action committee together. Got to get all that worked out.
But you'd like to run.
Well, Liam knows about what it's
Well,
like
but
to
you-
try and get selected to run for mayor. It's a difficult job, isn't it?
It's very difficult.
Right, thanks for the sympathy there. Right, we're going to throw it open while Ed Vaizey prevaricates for a change. Yes, here at the front.
Yes.
Say your name and actually wait
man.
for
Wait
the
for the
microphone to
microphone.
come to you, because although we will be able to hear you here, they might not be able to hear you behind. If you haven't got a booming voice like mine, come round to the front. Thank you. And there will be mics coming round. And just say who you are and a shortage question.
Owen Bennett from Huffington Post. I just wanted to ask the panel, did they think the fact that the art industry in general backed Remain showed just how out of touch the creative arts sector is for the majority of people in this country, and it shows it is actually just far too elite and not coming from areas like yours, Liam, and all over the country, and how can that be changed?
Liam.
No, I don't think it does. I think the creative industries know what makes for people who work in the creative industries know what's good for the creative industries, and they know that creative diversity, cooperation with our neighbours is a good thing. They recognise that economic growth at a faster pace is a good thing, and they recognise that the benefits of staying inside Europe outweigh the advantages of leaving. So I think people who work in the creative industries overwhelmingly know which side their bread is buttered, and they voted in that way.
Do you agree with that, Manick, with Owen's question?
To a large degree, I do actually. I think there's a lot of self-interest in the creative industries, and obviously everyone the selfish urge to protect their sector and their own kind of communities in a sense. And but the shock after the EU referendum from the creative sector was they compared it to 7/7 or 9/11. The kind of
Did they?
Yeah. In terms of how they felt the next morning. That is something that there's a lot of over emotionalism and exaggeration. That's what artists tend to do. They're quite dramatic about things.
Unlike levers getting in a trawler today to throw fish in the river.
Well, should we
Nothing
stick to the
dramatic
arts?
about
Should we
that.
stick to the arts?
No, I want to talk about fish.
We could have a sort of Boycean, representative
Exactly,
democracy
fish have
versus
a very
direct
important place in
democracy
the arts.
Are fish more leave
boxing
than
match,
remain?
as a performance arts.
I mean, what really
event.
annoys me is
But-
that
Well, hang on. We'll come on to what annoys you.
let me finish.
it's sort of random.
I think
Harmony.
it has shaken up, and rightfully it has to shake up the laziness of the cultural quarter, because what it tends to do is that it nudges people to kind of making them think that they have to think the right way about things, and that certainly was not the case. So if you look at Hull, which is a UK city of culture, not European city of culture, absolutely it was a fantastic moment. hundreds of people, thousands,
Did you
millions
go,
of people go. No, I didn't. But I went
Did
to
you?
Mid- I
Don't
went,
go
Did
into
you?
politics. Of course I did. I was the culture
I
minister.
I went to Middlesbrough, which
Well,
is
I've been to
even
Middlesbrough
more.
too. I mean,
and,
I went to Liverpool when it was the European
and
City of Culture.
what I
Let Manick
noticed.
finish his point, I'll come
What
to
I
you.
noticed. Actually, I'm going to focus on Middlesbrough actually, because the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, MIMA, which is a £10 million lottery build. The day I went there, which was a nice, lovely summer's day in June, and it was empty. There was hardly anyone there. And you suddenly start to hear local people in the pub, that it's a museum that doesn't connect with them. It doesn't connect with the working class communities there.
Right, well, let's put that
And
to...
I think that's a very big issue.
Right, well, let's put that to
No,
Ed
I
Vaizey
to-
and the
I-
answer to Owen, and the
I
answer to Ed's
totally,
question.
I totally accept that. We had the public in West Bromwich, which is a complete, well, Liam will probably know quite a lot about complete.
Complete,
You
white
can't
elephants.
land these things in the middle of a community without connecting with the community. I
But did it
remember,
show how the creative
I
industries
remember
were
writing
elitist?
to the head of Nottingham Contemporary, who's now the head of the Tate, saying to him, Paul Smith comes from Nottingham. Why don't you do an exhibition about Paul Smith? He said, no, we're an international contemporary art museum. I think, well, come off it.
Interesting.
Connect with your community. Funny enough, and some of them do. I mean, the Turner in Margate actually does really connect with its community and really has helped regenerate Margate. So, but what I want to cavil against is this kind of idea that somehow Remainers are this kind of elite, out of touch. There are 16 million of us who voted Remain and 17 million voted Leave. So the country is basically 50-50. So how dare the
48,
Leavers
52.
talk down to us Remainers all the time? You don't talk down to the scientists who voted Remain, the scientists in my constituency who voted Remain because they collaborate internationally with European scientists, because they recognise that projects like nuclear fusion, which is a European collaborative project, and all the other projects they do are European collaborations. You don't talk down
no
to
one's ignoring
BMW and the Mini factory in Cowley, which is a German company which is employing British workers
All
to
right.
make cars in Britain who are Remainers.
Right.
Why do you
You've
talk
made-
down to artists? Because they believe in Europe and believe in Remain.
Right, well, on that note, you'll be pleased to know I'm going to ask the chief
Yeah,
the chief
so
heckler.
do you.
The chief heckler.
Yeah, and I
Hang
believe in
on,
Europe. So
hang
why do you talk
on.
down to me about it?
Ed Vaizey. Let's have the chief
Hello.
heckler, who I'm sure has
Let's
got a
have the
name.
chief
Right.
fish heckler.
I'm going to speak to the people back here.
Okay. Say your name, though, and keep it
My
so we
name's
can hear
Meg,
it.
and I grew up in a federal monolithic superstate
Remember, it's a
called...
question, not a monologue.
Yeah, well, well, I'm outnumbered, so we get to have a few more extra seconds.
Oh.
Minutes.
You've awarded yourself that. Right, come on, with the
What is the
question.
super state you
Okay,
grew up
so
in? We're on 10
a monolithic superstate called the United States of America. Over my lifetime, I watched power trickle from the individual states to the federal government. What that's resulted in is a lot of strife and unrest. Far from multiculturalism and diversity, it creates a homogeneity. When you get a few people making laws for a large group of people, it creates more polarity. Laws, like food, should be sourced locally, and they should benefit people closest to home.
Right, Meg,
I
we
think
need the
that
question because we've got to get other
it'll be
questions
coming.
in. Right.
The,
Well, no,
the debate
it needs to
tonight
come now.
is really one of globalization, which, when it comes to art, I'm so surprised that you on stage, especially you, are ignoring.
Who,
Okay,
me?
okay. So I think you like
Let me
My
go.
question is. My understanding is that people are happy. A lot of people are happy with the European Union now, and the laws they make. What happens 10 years from now when they implement something that you really can't live with? In this country, we can form activist groups, we can sign petitions, we
Okay.
can contact journalists.
No, it's a good
But
question. Let me-
how are you going to change the law 10 years from now
All right.
when the EU suddenly shows a different face? Because this is kind of a honeymoon
All right,
period.
Meg, let me put that to Liam Byrne, because sovereignty was very important. And actually, if you're making your own laws, you can make your own decisions about things like everything from immigration and a whole range of things that people in this country would like our government to do rather than the E EU.
So look, since the fall of the Berlin Wall back in 1989, we have grown tighter together in Europe. And actually that has unlocked a level of prosperity in Europe that has never been known before in European history. It's guaranteed a level of peace that has actually been unprecedented, and it has created opportunities for people like my children that we just could not imagine before. And so, are the sacrifices of shared sovereignty worth the incredible prize? Absolutely. The level of economic growth, the level of peace, the opportunity of prosperity has just risen exponentially because of the way that we were able
Hang on,
to.
let him finish.
I'm sorry, maybe it's
Let him
difficult
finish.
I'm sorry, maybe it's hard to kind of share this perspective if you've grown up in America rather than if you've grown up here in the UK. But look, so I am answering the question. And the question is simple.
Yeah,
we enjoy a level of prosperity and security now on a continent that has been torn apart by violence for 1,000 years.
Hang on, Beg. Let him finish because we've got to move on to other questions. Yeah, go on, Lim. Right, hang on. But
But the answer is simple. Do you want to listen to the answer or not? Do you want to listen to the answer or not?
Yes, please, my question, please.
The sacrifice of shared sovereignty is worth the gain that we get through tighter cooperation.
What are you going to do in 10 years' time if the European Union enacts a
right,
law
but that is a speculative.
that
But
that
that's a
is totally
speculative
speculative.
question, and we don't know.
We're-
Meg, I need you to sit down.
Okay.
That's my question.
Right, Liam, shortly, and then we'll move
We
on.
are a partner at the table. We get the chance to influence and negotiate. So actually, Europe doesn't impose in Britain, hasn't imposed in Britain since it was created, and since we joined in the early 1970s.
Right, okay.
And so you can speculate all you like, but actually the prize that's now been denied to my children, the prizes that I enjoyed in my life, is a luxury they won't have and which I did. And that is something that I regret in the argument that you make and people like you make.
Right.
Saying it
You've had
Okay,
your say. You've had your say.
let's-
I am now
let's,
going to
open it out
intervene.
wider.
Can I just read out one of the Twitter questions, which we had from Robert Gordon Clark from the London Communications Agency.
Oh, I know him.
And well done. And he asked, what changes do you want to see to the British Council's role post-Brexit?
Oh my God. That's a bit.
Well, the British Council, obviously, it's been booted out of Russia, sadly. But the British Council is really an important voice for Britain across the globe. And it should still look to cultural collaboration and exchange, and it should look to how to show the best of Britain, in a sense, and but also to think about ideas of democracy, ideas of representation and direct democracy. So these are kind of exciting kind of moments for us to start looking at how we engage in a world where there's still a lot of undemocratic authoritarian states.
All right.
So I think the British Council's got a big job ahead of them, and actually the government needs to give them a bit more money.
More money. Any more questions from the floor? Yes, the lady there, please. Just say your name and your question.
Okay, I'm Ethne Nightingale. Throughout the last decade or so, I've been responsible for bringing over, or trying to bring over, artists from India or the Caribbean or whatever for 2 months. This is a very practical question. It's sometimes been extremely difficult because of the immigration and the questions about visas and whatever. So what's going to happen with Europe? Are people who are going to come from Spain or from France as artists for a 2-month residency, are they going to be subject to the same kind of questioning? And also, let's recognise the amazing contribution that refugees have given to, whether it's Dorothy Bohm or Yinka Shonibari, to the arts. So how are we going to open up this, allow and sustain the creativity of which we've benefited from for so long?
Well, Manick, you answer it first and then I'll go to Ed.
because I campaigned for many years against New Labour's points-based system that was introduced in 2008, 2009, which then many non-EU artists were refused visas, or even some of the countries like Australian artists and American artists would arrive without the right paperwork and then get booted back out to Canada or the USA. Absolutely unjustified, in my opinion. So what I hope is that that we have to look at immigration, but I think we should look at that artists are not economic migrants first and foremost. So they shouldn't be part of a points-based system. There has to be some kind of exemptions for artists, and then we can start looking at aligning a much smoother alternative freedom of movement for artists, both European EU artists as well as non-EU.
All right. Well, let me
And
put
I
that to
think,
Ed Vaizey.
that,
Should
there's
artists
certain
get
things
special treatment?
practical things we can do to drop that.
Yes.
Should they get special treatment?
Anyone who
What, anyone?
self-declares as an artist should be able to. No. I was aware as I had to deal with this all the time when I was culture minister. A lot of people coming over from outside the EU facing really, really difficult immigration issues. But having said that, again, it's always important to put it in context that, somehow you think when you're on the receiving end, this is a completely unreasonable system. But actually, if you talk to any British musician who wants to play in the US, the kind of visa issues they face in trying to get into the US are equally difficult. So I do think, I
met an artist yesterday who got a 2-year visa for China. She's free to come and leave China as she wishes.
Great.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
That's good. And I think that's an interesting model.
So
it's something to think about.
You sound absolutely
in my experience, China is fairly selective
But I
about
mean,
the artists it
solves
lets in.
everything.
Well, practically,
And
though,
it throws
how
out
are they going to get special treatment?
there is a practical. The Arts Council and the Home Office had sort of special units to kind of look at this. But I think there's nothing wrong with saying that there should be some kind of system that that allows common sense to prevail. As Manick said, well, the artists are clearly coming here to perform and engage and, expand our horizons, just as our artists who go abroad. We had the earlier question about the British Council. Our artists who go abroad are engaged in the same exercise. So you should have a system. We lobbied with the US Embassy, for example, to have a system whereby British artists who wanted to play in the States, not had a fast track or special treatment, but or at least there was an element of common sense that people were not, a 4-piece band was not going over to secretly try and remain in the United States and work. They were going over to play gigs and
do you think your government's going to do that? Is actually going to make those exceptions?
I'm sure they will. Matt Hancock's brilliant at this kind of thing.
Right. Okay. Well, you've got his word for it. Yeah. Hang on. If you want to ask a question, do put your hand up. We'll get the microphone to you.
Good.
Because then I'm going to ask another question from the Twitter questions that have come in. Go on.
Thank you. Have to stand up. I was going to ask about where the line goes with established artists, emerging artists, performance artists, tattoo artists, Madonna.
Piss artists.
For example. Yeah, piss artists.
Sorry.
Joe, your potty mouth.
Where does that line go when you're talking about crossing over? Because to build an audience and to build a level of respect and international, you need to have that platform to go there. And where would you put a line to say your creativity is better than yours?
Very good question. We should debate it extensively.
No, that sounds like you haven't got an answer. What is your answer?
There are perfectly, things like PPL, for example, the Performing Licensing Organisation, takes over breaking new British acts to the States every year. You can work with established institutions in the UK to, just as the Arts Council is an established institution in terms of organisations coming over to the UK to say that, and just as we, have established education institutions, established employers who the immigration authorities recognise as being legitimate, and we can have a very entertaining discussion about visas for tattoo artists.
Let me pose this question from that's coming from Twitter. Anna Menon, UK in a Changing Europe. What steps do you think, Liam Byrne, that people in the creative industries, a whole range of artists or in the digital economy, what steps can they take now to prepare for Brexit? What advice would you give them?
Gosh, I think that's really tough. So one, they have to be inside the Home Office all the time, arguing for the right immigration policy, because
you think that's the number one thing? Do you?
Yeah, without a doubt, because the changes that are coming to the immigration system are just like the hugest risk to the creative economy. I mean, Manick sketches out his kind of ambition, and sadly, that is just not going to happen. The government remains committed to a migration target of tens of thousands. They're going to use the end of free movement to basically put in place the policies that implement that. So what the creative sector needs to be is kind of just lobbying like crazy
And beyond immigration?
So beyond immigration, there are probably two things. One is we've got to transform the education system, I'm afraid, here, because the way creativity is being starved out of the curriculum now is incredibly damaging to the future of the arts and the creative industries more generally. And third, we've got to treat arts investment like an infrastructure investment. So, the government talks a lot about boosting productivity and piling money into infrastructure, and it's got quite a traditional definition of infrastructure, which basically means concrete. And actually, it's not concrete that we need, it's creativity that we need. And so making the argument for the creative sector as a kind of foundation for the rest of the economy, that's just a basic truth of the 21st century. So those are the kind of three things that needs to happen now.
Guidance there from Lee and Byrne. Can I have a final question, probably from the audience? Yes, the gentleman here, if you just wait for the microphone, please, and say your name and a question.
Yeah, my name's Michael.
No, well, please put your hands up. I didn't see any other hands going up.
It's a bit dark.
Where?
Yeah.
Some at the back.
Well, we'll have another one. Right, question from you, and then we'll take another one.
My name's Michael Lightfoot. I co-founded Artists for Brexit with Manick. There's so many things you could talk about, but I think it's important to note that, as we know, the majority of the population voted for Brexit. We believe if you consider those people, and then you consider a large chunk of the people that voted for Remain that nevertheless respect democracy. Okay, if you bring those people together and include creative people, I mean, obviously this is a general point, right? But when it comes to when it comes to what my question is that if we don't, I don't see what choice we've got. If we would like to have Remain people get on board, and our only criterion is that they respect the vote.
All right.
If you don't respect the vote, I can't see it ending very well.
All right. Well, let's sit down. Well, sit down.
I don't see what choice we've got.
The question is there. Should you guys just get on board, you two?
What do you think we do every day in the House of Commons right now? I mean, we have voted to go ahead with it.
Exactly.
That is what we are hammering out. And guess
the
what?
Trouble with
it's messy, ugly, and damaging for the future of our country.
I want to speak to. So the trouble with these cake and eat it Brexiteers is that they campaign to get out of the European Union without actually telling us what the alternative was. So it's left to us as the Remainers, because the Brexiteers just say, it's got to be, we can't decide what it's going to be. So it's actually left to us, Liam and me, the Remainers. We have to sort out your mess. We have to sort out your mess and decide what kind of Brexit we're going to get. And every time we come forward with practical solutions, so that's not what the British people voted for. That's not pure Brexit. Well, frankly, you never told us what a pure Brexit was. What was your pure Brexit? You never told us.
Right, on pure Brexit, no, Meg, because you've had a... Can I have the man at the back,
terrible.
please?
You never told us.
Sorry, because
you never told us.
We're not going to have a two-way
They never told us, Jo.
What do you want me to do about it? The man at the back, do speak up over the noise.
My name is Nick Hansen. I'd like to speak to just one policy-related question. So John Major recently at the Creative Industries Federation called for a second referendum and a free vote on Brexit. And at the Creative Industries Federation conference last week, Hilary Benn also said, okay, we're probably going to have a vote in Parliament at some point by the end of the year, but given the fact that there will be a long and substantial transition period, how do we actually know if we are voting at this point what we're actually voting for? So my point that I'd like to put to the panel is, how can everyone pretend to be so sure that they know what's going to happen, that everything's going to work out so easily? I don't see it.
Right, Manick.
Well, no, I think, I'm not looking through a crystal ball to say this is what's going to happen. One has to be active in the sense of optimism, and then thinking about how do you try and implement an optimistic
But are you just crossing
approach.
your fingers?
No. I think we as everyone said, you campaign, you lobby, you talk, as you said, you get into the centre of the various departments, governmental departments, and you make your case to ensure that, in terms of the arts and cultural sector, that there's the best possible relationship that happens that allows arts producers having to spend 5 days writing carnets to kind of export equipment and goods for a film shoot or an exhibition, and that we're not having to do huge amounts of bureaucratic paperwork to get an artist into the UK.
All right.
So that is a given that we do not want that. I think that's where we might agree on that. We do not want more
yes, I think you do all agree on that. Liam, should there be a second referendum? Would that save the creative industries?
I don't think it should be a second referendum. I think Parliament should get the final vote. We need to make sure that we get that vote early enough so that
you've got
if
that
the deal is we've got it. But the key is the timing now. So what we have to do is make sure the vote is early enough so that there is time to both respect the transition agreement that's been agreed, but also give negotiators time to go back to the table for a different deal if what they end up with is going to send us over the cliff.
Would you vote it down at this point?
Yeah, you've got to put country before party, and if the deal that is put on the table is a disaster for Britain, then you're kind of morally obliged to use your judgment and vote against it.
One more question. I've got time for one more question. Yes, I think I can't quite see. Somebody here wanted to say it's difficult for me to see. Yes, take the microphone, stand up just so we can see you.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
You want me to stand up?
Yeah. Oh, stand. Go on, take centre stage.
Hello. So basically just about the fashion industry. The fashion industry is really heavily funded by the EU, and obviously fashion is very, very inspired by many different cultures and inspires different creative sectors, and also banking and all that sort of thing. What happens to the fashion sector when all the EU is kind of run out and the money's not going to that kind of
Well, let's talk to our sartorial correspondent here on my left hand. What happens to the fashion industry?
Well, you only have to look at me to know that I was fashion minister for 6 years. I appeared on the BBC PMQs thing. They do this thing in the central lobby where they get people to apply on PMQs. And the only tweet, I mean, literally nobody watches it. It's on BBC News. What? They're not your thing. Oh, right. The BBC News channel. Literally the only tweet was, Ed Vaizey looks like he slept in his clothes last night. I mean, I think
it's
they
true.
don't appreciate
sometimes
high
that has
fashion.
been true.
They don't appreciate
it's so hard about what I wear.
It is a sort of geography teacher look.
The other key fashion point, which I forgot to mention, is if you want to spot a hardcore Remainer, like Liam and me, we're Ken Clark acolytes. Brown suede shoes. If any of you kind of foaming levers in the front row here,
and I'm wearing my docks. But
just walk down the street,
Vietnam,
spot a man with brown suede shoes, or indeed a woman, and you can heckle them.
Do you like jazz as well?
I wasn't aware that the
industry?
EU did support the fashion industry. I mean, certainly the British government doesn't give any money to the fashion industry. It's a bit of a disgrace. Our two most successful industries, publishing and fashion, get very little financial support from government. But I have to say the British Fashion Council does an incredible job in promoting British fashion. It's the most effective trade body I've ever come across. And London Fashion Week, for example, has grown in leaps and bounds to compete with Milan and Paris and indeed New York. But fashion is a global industry, and Britain remains still a great honeypot for global fashion brands to come and base themselves here. We'll have to see, again, the impact of Brexit, because for fashion, it's a kind of wider issue about, who's going to base themselves here, and it is still all about that creative collaboration. So the effects of Brexit will be more cultural, if you like, rather than sort of straightforward, money is being cut off from fashion. For example, our fashion colleges, again, are world-leading and attract people from all over the world.
And do you think they'll struggle with Brexit?
But it's interesting to watch which British businesses have done really well in big growth markets. So, I mean, if you look at countries like China, if you look at the success of companies like Burberry or Jaguar Land Rover, I mean, these are companies that marry fantastic manufacture with design brilliance.
Right.
But that design brilliance is kind of rooted in some pretty diverse and multicultural teams here in the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not kind of monochromatic teams that we've got in Britain that are producing this kind of design excellence. They're diverse teams, and there is like an existential threat to that diversity that is about to hit us. And I'm afraid the fashion industry.
Well, on that optimistic note, I am going to wrap it up. But thank you.
Just got going.
Thank you. I think we have to come to a close. We've only slightly overrun. But thank you very much for being so interactive, can I put it that way, and making it a very lively discussion and debate. Food for thought, I hope. perhaps using a different metaphor to the fashion one. Could we give our panellists, though, a round of applause? And I'd like to thank you all myself. Well done. Enjoy the rest of your evening.